Hello friends, Mr. E here, and today I'd like to talk about the humble crowbar. Yes, the crowbar is a weapon that I really love. It is so aesthetically pleasing. There's something about the concept of this weapon, of just being a blunt piece of metal that you can just uppercut an enemy to the moon, or you can bring it crashing down on their skull and pry their face off with it. Those ideas, the way that this weapon could be swapped between these two modes is so ingenious, and it's such a cool concept for a weapon. And I'm certain that I am not alone when I say that I picked up this weapon when I first got the class, because I saw it in the marketing material and I was like, hell yeah, like this is going to be pretty cool. I'm going to be Gordon Freeman. And I played a couple games with it and I was like, okay, this is all right. And then what inevitably happens to players who play with the crowbar is they play with another weapon on the class. They play with the shivs, or they play with the tack axe, or whatever it is. And then they go, oh, the crowbar kind of sucks, huh? And that is the crowbar, classic crowbar experience, is he seems okay in a vacuum, and then you play with other weapons and you're like, oh wait, no, this isn't anywhere near as good as the other options. And yeah, that's the problem that what I want to address today. We have a weapon that is an exclusive weapon to the class, so you can only play with this on Hive Scum, and I would say that this weapon is 6 out of 10 in terms of power rankings out of the 10 available melee weapons on the class. And that is just not good enough. I want better for my boy the crowbar. I don't need him to be the dueling sword. I don't need him to be the shivs. I don't need him to be the best weapon in the game. I just need him to be number 3 or maybe number 4, right? I need him to get some value that makes me want to bring a crowbar to a game over any other weapon. Because right now, this is the biggest thing that I want to drive home in this video again and again, is that there's really no reason to bring the crowbar over any other weapon on the Hive Scum. And that's a damn shame, because this weapon has such potential to be unique, to be like defining for certain builds, and it just misses the mark. So we'll be addressing what the issues are behind the crowbar, and I'll also be positing some suggestions, and you can also leave your suggestions what could be done to help the crowbar out and get it into a higher status in the comments below. And if you enjoy crowbars, well, I don't really talk about crowbars a lot on the channel here, but we do talk about Darktide. So if you like Darktide, you should subscribe. And crowbars. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the basic theory, the basic hypothesis. I kind of laid it out already, but I have 3 parts to this hypothesis. 3 reasons why I think the crowbar is really lagging behind its competitors. Let's first of all talk about the weapons that I think are out-competing it, which are the bone saw, the combat blade, the devil's claw sword, the shivs, and the tactical axe. These 5 weapons here are the betters of the crowbar. The crowbar is 6 out of 10 in its category here, and yeah, not great. The reasoning behind these being better on this class is because they bring something unique to the table. And I guess I've already said this, but yeah, the crowbar doesn't have any use cases. It doesn't have a reason why you'd make a build and say, oh, I specifically want the crowbar for this, whatever this is. Now, let's just go through here and run a quick thought experiment. For these other 5 weapons, what is the this for each of these 5 weapons? Let's start with the shivs. Well, the shivs are fucking insane, right? The shivs have insane damage ratios on them. They have uncanny strike, well, partially uncanny strike. They have a stacking crit chance. They're just ungodly mobile. Like, these weapons are nuts. So yeah, no brainer to take the shivs because they're just overshadowed as fuck. The tactical axe is the single highest critical chance weapon on this class, and it attacks 1.2 trillion times per second, I believe is the number. This weapon, without having stims active, can hit 92% crit on the class, which is okay, that's balanced. So yeah, tactical axe, pretty good. Devil's Claw has the parry. This weapon is actually incredibly solid. You should become a channel member, by the way, so you can see my parrying Devil's Claw sword build. It's fun as fuck, and you'll be supporting me and my Bernie. Okay, so Devil's Claw, yeah, parry is disgusting on this class. Rampage plus Devil's Claw goes hard as fuck. No more questions. Combat Blade, kind of in the same vein as shivs, super mobile, has 100% uncanny strike, so you can just rend all that armor, you can stack bleeds on enemies, right? This sort of stuff, like this weapon, and crits, of course, goes a billion times harder with that. And then Bonesaw has an exclusive use case because this is the weapon that can apply a toxin stack, either green or purple, on every single hit. So you can get all sorts of benefits and synergies with the class there is a reason to use the bone saw. Even if it had like terrible stats, you would still see people using the bone saw because it can apply toxins, and toxins have like powerful synergies in the class. Fortunately for the weapon, it also happens to have pretty good stats, so you see this weapon used quite a bit. Okay, so there's reasons to use all these. What's the reason to use the crowbar? Your guess is as good as mine. Let me give you an idea of what I think the designers behind the crowbar might have wanted to make for it, which is something to do with probably its stagger potential. I think the idea here is that this weapon is versatile, and that this is the only weapon on the class that ostensibly can do stagger. If you look at these stagger values here, when you're hitting with a heavy attack, that big sweeping heavy baseball strike attack, or these attacks here, they have like, 13 to 20-ish stagger. That's okay, right? It's way better than, I don't know, like what's the bonus I'll have? 7, right? On the light attacks here, 10. And then we get like 14 and 27. Like these are 1.5 times higher on that, and the same thing, even more so, applies to the daggers, right? 2, 4. Like these weapons aren't staggering at all. So that's one of the main selling points we're supposed to be here for the crowbar, is that it is a stagger weapon. It's supposed to make you a little bit more defensive when you're using it, and then you can turn it around and go into that strike down mode and go for single target kills. Cool. The problem is that it doesn't go hard enough in any one direction. It trades off a lot of damage in order to have more stagger value, but it doesn't get enough stagger value to actually make you safe while using it. There are weapons in this game, to be clear, there are weapons in this game that don't need to be all about damage, right? The Ogren's slab shield, the Arbites with the maul, or the shock maul, or the maul and shield, all of which have enough stagger potential to disable enemies so they can't attack back, including crushers. These enemies get laid out on the floor, and then you can pummel them to death. It doesn't matter how low the damage is, because they'll die eventually, and they won't be able to attack. This weapon trades off damage to get more stagger, but doesn't have enough stagger to actually functionally stagger stuff. That's a problem. It also trades off so much damage that it can't compete with the other just straight damaging weapons now, and so you're just already out of the gate going to be being like, wait a second, this thing feels weak. And that pretty much means that because the base stats of the weapon have been lowered in order to sort of compensate for having more stagger, you are going to be playing with this weapon on any non-melee build and be like, this feels like garbage. Yeah, this weapon, when you're playing non-melee focused, like non-rampage, is like really, really bad. Like it just can't function because it doesn't get anything extra. Bone Saw, however, on non-melee builds is actually very good because its attacks, it can stack shred, it can stack this refined lethality thing, and its attacks put toxin on the enemies, which will kill them regardless of whether or not you're hitting them hard with the individual attacks. The crowbar, and these get high, like super high ratios, and mobility and all sorts of stuff. But the crowbar of all of these really needs a melee configuration to give it that extra oomph to push it over the threshold where it can actually be like played with. And that is a real sign that it is struggling. So that's the first big red flag for the weapon, is that it doesn't have anything unique that makes you go, oh, I need to bring this weapon over all other weapons for this particular build. I haven't been able to find one yet. If you know the build, well then let me know. Okay, let's move on to the second thing, and this thing is so big, this thing is so critically important. I gave it away already, but it is so critically important to the balance of Darktide right now that I'm making a whole separate video on it. It's crit. It is critical strikes. Critical strikes in Darktide are broken. They just are absurdly good. Critical strikes not only deal extra damage, but they penetrate armor partially. So you will deal way more damage to an armored target with a crit than you would like the normal increase over the non-crit versus the crit, right? It actually penetrates armor more at the same time. Then there's a whole host of knock-on effects that can happen when you crit, such as for the dagger or wherever it is. Critting with this applies bleeds. You have classes that can dodge when they crit. This class in particular, if you can crit, you're gonna get up to 12% of your toughness back by critting when you get a headshot. And of course, critting is just better all around for damage, and it gives you higher stagger when you crit. So crits are good, and crits are so fucking good, in fact, that pretty much almost all of the meta right now is defined by crits. Again, there's like 2, maybe 3 weapons that aren't really crit focused, but pretty much every single melee weapon in the game that's really, really good right now is a crit powerhouse. So when we look at the weapon that we're talking about today, the crowbar, well, how good is it with crits? I'm gonna give you one guess that it's mid to bad would be the correct answer there. So we look at a couple of things here. I want to first look at the light attacks. The really important thing here to look at is the ratio here, right? We want to look at the ratio between our number here and our number here on the critical. So we've got like roughly a like 1.6. This is like a 2, right? So this is 2 times, 2 times. This is 3 times. Okay. This on the heavy attacks, we got 2 and some change. 3 times, or sorry, 2 times and some change, less than 2, less than 2. Okay, so we have like roughly around the 2x multiplier. Let's start off with a really direct competitor, the bone saw, another slow two-handed weapon on the class, and let's look at what its crits do. So we have on light attacks here, 2 times, 3 times, almost 3 times, 2 times, 2 times. Okay, let's go to the heavy attack here. This is more than, this is 2.5, this is 2.5, this is almost 3, this is 2.5, this is almost 3. Okay, so we are already ahead in crits, and note that this doesn't even factor in the fact that this weapon also has this critical bonus thing here that gives you an extra 15% damage when you get crits, and it gives you an extra 5% crit chance, okay, just considering that. Now, these weapons down here are obviously even more slanted in that favor, right? The shivs. The shivs are disgusting. Light attacks, 2.5, 3 times, 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, right? And then the heavy attacks over here. Oh wait, what was the light attack? Oh my god, yeah, like this is like what? 5 times, almost 5 times. Then we have 2.5, 3.5, 4. 5, like to 4, like these ratios are massive, right? They are getting such huge increases every time they get a crit that it is throwing it into stark contrast with the crowbar, which only gets 2 times damage on a crit. Not only can this weapon make less use of crits when they happen, which is a big problem because this class, just as with this configuration right here, which by the way is Gordon Fentman, which is a build that's specifically built for the crowbar. This build right here, as laid out, has 55% crit, just sitting here. So that's a lot of crit, right? You need to be maximizing every percentage crit that you have on this class because you're getting a lot of them. And doing more with them makes you better. So crit-focused weapons are going to go way, way harder on this class. And this is not a crit-focused weapon. The second thing is that this weapon lags behind its competitors in terms of its ability to generate crit. So we already talked about how the bone saw gets an extra 5% crit and 15% critical strike damage, but the tack axe gets an extra 12% critical strike chance and almost 40% critical damage versus flak, unyielding, and carapace. This weapon goes like gangbusters with crits. Of course, the daggers get really, really big benefits out of crits, but look at the blessings that I have on these weapons as well. We have Shred, 20% crit. We have Shred, 20% crit. We have, well, I don't have it on my normal dagger, but these ones do. Riposte, 20% crit. Shred, 20% crit. What does the crowbar get to generate crit? Let's go ahead and check. It gets 1 talent that can generate crit, which is this one right here. Bash, 12.5 crit chance, or 3 seconds on pushing enemies. So we get a worse blessing numerically, like it's way less crit than the other classes have, like 2/3 as much. So we're getting only 2/3 as much crit chance increase, and the other weapons, what they do to get the crit is they just keep attacking. Shred, every time you land an attack, it adds crit chance to you. How hard is that to do? You can use any attack to do that. The other one that was in there was Riposte, that literally dodging an attack gives you 6 seconds of 20% crit. For this weapon, for the crowbar, you have to push an enemy, which interrupts your attack pattern, and then you will get 12.5% crit, 2/3 as much crit for only 3 seconds. And then you have to replenish it, rather than just keeping attacking, which is massively detrimental for another reason we'll talk about in a second. So this weapon loses out on crit massively. It uses crit less effectively than all the rest of the weapons in the class do, all the good ones anyway. And that sucks because this class has over 50% crit to start with. It's a crit-based class. And it has less ability to generate critical chance, which means it's just completely out of the running. So in order to compete in terms of raw damage, It just needs to have higher base stats for damage, and it doesn't compete there, like, really at all.
And even if it did, it wouldn't matter because of a little talent we'll talk about in a minute called Hyperviolence that completely changes the base stats of these weapons.
And then we'll go on to perhaps the most damning part of the whole thing. It's the talents. It's the talent tree. It's the way the class is built. This class is incredibly biased towards fast attacking, crit-based weapons, crit-focused weapons. And pretty much all of its talents scream, pick a fast crit weapon. That's all they're screaming. There are tons of melee-focused talents in this tree, and I think for my money, only one of them, we're going to go through them, but I think only one of them is actually biased in favor of the crowbar. Every single other one is either neutral, and most of them are biased in favor of those crit fast attacking weapons. So let's start here at the top. We have neutral ones with close range damage on dodge. We have a neutral one with tertium welcome. Then we have one that is biased in favor of fast attacking crit weapons, precision violence. The faster you can hit and the more crits you hit, the more toughness you're going to replenish. This just makes you a safer fighter when you're using fast attacking crit weapons like the tac axe or the daggers. Then we use float like a butterfly. Remember that every percentage of crit on the class is more effectively used by those crit attackers than it is by the crowbar. So every time you see crit chance on this tree, the crowbar is actually falling farther and farther behind because the other weapons are pulling farther and farther ahead effectively. We come down past this, we'll take past our grenades, we'll go down here, and then here's 5% crit. There you go. So another 5% crit that's creeping those crit weapons farther and farther ahead. We get to Rampage. Rampage is a weapon. There is a skill that is biased in favor of these low damage, fast attacking weapons because it stacks damage. It stacks a ton of freaking damage. And again, what extends the duration of Rampage? What makes Rampage last longer? It's not Viagra, it's melee strikes. You need to hit enemies. So if you can attack really, really fast, you will extend your Rampage longer. And so therefore, again, fast attacking weapons, which are those crit weapons, are going to be favored with Rampage. You're going to keep a better Rampage uptime. You're going to lose uptime if you are using heavy overhead strikes like the crowbar likes to do. And yeah, so that just has less synergy with this than you would otherwise. The only way this build that I made, by the way, that Gordon Fettman really works is because it stacks a fuck ton of stamina in order to give this crowbar decent attack speed. Okay, coming down this way, over on the left here, we have the soul redeeming node, the node that, we, by the way, have 5% more crit here for those daggers to pull ahead. We have swift endurance here, which benefits all weapons neutrally, but really does help the crowbar a lot, because it increases the attack speed of this weapon. But it also increases the attack speed of the bone saw, and the bone saw is better. So yeah, it's keeping all of them neck and neck. The daggers don't need it as much, but the bone saw does, and the bone saw runs with this because every attack you do is applying another stack of toxin. Every attack you do with the crowbar is doing, nothing comparatively. Then we have the sweet spot, weak spot damage. This is biased against the crowbar yet again, because I didn't mention this previously, but look at the weak spot. The weak spots are less than the criticals. We actually are doing less than 2x damage on yielding, less than 2x damage on flak. When we're swapping to heavy attacks, less than 2x, less than 2x, less than 2x. Look at my weak spots on this weapon here. Well, that's 1.5, but like, look at these. Double, double, double. And then we go to, of course, the daggers. Like, what do you think this is going to be, right? 2.5, 2.5, 3, 3, 2.5, 3.5, 3. Like, these ratios are favoring these dagger weapons, these super fast attacking crit-based weapons, and having a 25% weak spot damage boosts those even further. So, again, the crowbar falling behind. Okay, over here we have, let's start with the one talent that actually favors the crowbar, cheap shots. Cheap shots gives extra strength against staggered enemies, and the crowbar is the best staggering weapon on the class. So hooray, crowbar, you got a victory. Unfortunately, right next to it is battering strikes, which gives a bunch of cleave to weapons that are designed to not have cleave intentionally. So the tac axe, which normally is sort of limited to having to use brutal momentum because it has a pretty poor penetration, pretty poor cleave on it. It just gets 50% cleave added for free, and it gets 50% cleave from pulverizing strikes, so you're just cutting through hordes like absolute butter. One of the fundamental reasons why you'd want to use the crowbar, which is having pretty decent cleave and horde battering capabilities in the blunt mode, is now equalized at best because every other weapon can cleave like a fucking god. We'll come down here and we'll talk about hyperviolence. Okay, so hyperviolence is a big problem, and this one I'll come back to in a second. But hyperviolence is super omega biased against Crowbar, and it is potentially the worst, like the most mismatched talent for Crowbar to use, but it is still really good on Crowbar. The reason that hyperviolence is a problem for balancing this class, I talked about this in my specific video about hyperviolence, but hyperviolence biases this class super hard towards crit focused at fast attacking weapons because of two things. Firstly, you get the buff for however much overkill damage you did, 25% of that, for 1 full second. So however many attacks you can do in 1 second multiplies the effective damage that you stole out of getting that kill, right? So you're getting more value the more times you can attack. And when you get a crit, or when you get a headshot or whatever it is, the damage that you add here is multiplied. So think about this. Hyperviolence applies to the base damage of the weapon, right? So a weapon like the shivs, which have a low base damage relatively, are going to get a percentage-wise a much larger boost than the crowbar is with this high damage. So if I added, say I added 90 damage, or say I added 100 damage to this, and I did a light attack, that's double damage for this shiv. But for the crowbar, it's only 40% more damage. It's actually less than that because this is 171. So it's like a 35% damage boost versus a 100% damage boost because that's the baseline for the calculation. So that's one way that it falls behind, is it doesn't, this hyperviolence thing is like a great equalizer. It takes these weapons that have really low base values and makes them have super high base values. That's the one thing that's supposed to pull the crowbar ahead, is having those higher base values, and now that's gone. So the second thing here is that, of course, the attack speed thing is a big factor. If you can attack more times per second, you get more of a return on each proc of hyperviolence. And then thirdly, every time you crit, it multiplies the damage you deal, including the hyperviolence base damage that's stacked in, so you get this absolutely tremendously massive return on shivs, and you get much less on the crowbar. And then to round it out over here, we have a ton of stuff. Coded weaponry, this is gonna trigger only on crits, and you can stack it faster when you attack faster. So again, crit and attack speed focus weapons winning out here. All this stuff focuses around toxins, so it favors the bone saw and also weapons that can use this. And of course we have crits here, which are gonna favor crit based weapons instead of our lovely crowbar. But let me go ahead and demonstrate something that with hyperviolence real quick here. You see, I've been practicing a little bit. All right, so really easy with the shivs to use hyperviolence, right? Everyone's done this with hyperviolence. All you gotta do is, in order to get hyperviolence to do some massive damage, is you gotta get a big overkill on one enemy, and then you gotta stab the next enemy. And what do you wanna do? How do you wanna do that, right? With the shivs, it's pretty obvious, right? You wanna use that heavy attack. You wanna use this attack right here that does this huge multiplier, and you wanna get a headshot, and you wanna get a crit. That way, whatever damage you would have normally dealt, it gets added to and it gets multiplied way up, and it does a buttload of damage. So it's really easy. You just stim up, you use your ultimate, you get in there, you go boom, and then you go boom, and you boom, and then you blow them up, right? Boom, boom. And you do 6,372 damage, right? So really nice and balanced. Really fucking easy to do with the shivs, because the shivs are so fast that you can very easily get a headshot and then get another headshot within that 1 second window. Okay. Now we have to show where the crowbar has its issues, because the crowbar has a special passive, right? One of the ways that they're trying to make this crowbar level out in terms of power is this right here. Charge swings. You get extra 15% strength when you charge the heavy on this attack, right? So this attack here, that's 0%. But this, that's 15% extra power. That'll hit 15% harder. So I really want to use this one, right? And then I want to get this overhead strike down. I want to do that attack right there in order to get that attack. Remember, if I want to get that 12.5% extra crit, I got to push during this as well. So I have less chance of hitting a crit than the daggers do. Fortunately, I've got Take a Swing down here, which gives me 3 seconds, a whole 3 seconds of 60% weak spot damage, but I won't be able to fit that in order to get that in time to do the strike down. So in order to get this to work, in order to get the Hyperviolence damage to carry over, I don't even know if I can do it in time. Like, I have to do like this. Yeah, I couldn't get it in time. So I actually can't. I can't charge up a heavy attack on this guy because I don't have the time. I literally have to only use light attacks to trigger Hyperviolence with this weapon, because heavy attacks just take too long to effectively do it, versus, of course, the lovely daggers that can do the heavy attacks instantly. So yeah, the heavy attacks on this weapon being slow and methodical and like charging up like that, great design, except for on a class that benefits from how many attacks you can do in the next second.
And there's actually one more reason why these fast attacking, low base damage weapons are really preferable when it comes to Hyperviolence, and that is because the additive damage gets added into that base damage of the weapon. So it acts as an overall multiplier to your final damage. If I add 100 damage from Overkill to the Crowbar, it goes from 170 to 270 on light attacks and from 330 to 430 on heavies. That's like a 30% increase to light attack damage and a 25% increase to heavy attack damage. Then if I go to the shivs and I do the same thing, add 100 damage, it's a double damage on light attacks and it's a 50% increase on heavy attacks. So you'll see a much higher spike in damage on these sorts of weapons and these sorts of weapons than you would on the Crowbar, because it represents a much larger percentage of an increase over the normal attack size.
Hyperviolence is hugely biased against this weapon, and it's the best all-round like melee damage buff perhaps in the game, and this weapon doesn't get to effectively use it. So there you go. That is all 3 of my main reasons why this weapon is mid to bad on the class laid out. Firstly, it has no true identity. There's no reason to bring the Crowbar over any one of your other options. The second one is it is a poor steward of crit. It doesn't have a very good base generation of crit. It's like 2/3 of what the other classes have, and it doesn't use the crits that you do get anywhere near as effectively as the other weapons do. And thirdly, the whole entire talent tree, more or less, is biased against this weapon. Every talent that is good for melee is twice as good for all the other weapons, and this one is lagging behind. So, what can Fat Shark do to make this weapon better?
So we had 3 main issues that I identified with the Crowbar, and I'll be targeting each of them one by one. And the first one we had to start with is the Crowbar has no identity that makes it the pick for this build, that makes it better than the other options in any configuration. And that is because it doesn't go hard enough in any given direction. Now, I think we have too many weapons that are like all about the damage for their power level, and that's why they're brought, is because they have crazy damage. So we're not going to be steering in that direction. What we're going to be working with here is the fact that this Crowbar has a couple of unique mechanics. First of all, it has the ability to switch modes. You can switch it from like this to like this, right? And what they should be looking at to model this sort of switching modes is by giving them additional effects depending on how you're holding this weapon. So if you're holding it with the blunt side forward, maybe with the blunt side forward, it's applying a inbuilt sort of skullcrusher to the enemies by staggering them, or maybe it has ramping impact so that your attacks deal more and more impact over time. Whatever it might be, right? It just needs to have some sort of additional little thing that goes on when you're in this mode, rather than just being a little bit of extra impact and being able to swing it at hordes. The other mode with the claw down, where you're striking with this side, that side could have an inbuilt brittleness, like a can opener, because there is a blessing on this weapon that sometimes people take, but I think maybe even bleeds or something like that could be applicable as well, giving this weapon access to something that other weapons on the class don't have when you swap between modes. And obviously this is taking inspiration from the Bonesaw, which is a good weapon, and it's a good weapon in large part because it always applies those toxin effects. So it's a relevant weapon in a lot of builds, regardless of how much damage it does. And that's the direction we should be looking for the Crowbar. Don't stack damage, stack utility. And also, in the spirit of utility, let's talk about the other thing this weapon has going on that's unique, which is the charge swings. It increases your strength by 15% if you fully charge an attack, but I personally feel that we can keep the damage where it is, but the impact should go way up. I mean, we should make this impact strong enough that when you fully charge one of these attacks, a headshot to a crusher can knock it on the floor. If you fully charge an overhead claw strike and pull it down, you can grab the crusher on the top of the head and pull him on his face, or you can grab a bulwark even with their shield up and pull them down on their face as well, which would make this weapon, instead of having a spamming attacks identity like every other weapon in the class, then this weapon would have a utility of, okay, I'm going to charge up my big whomping heavy attacks, land them, and the enemy won't be able to retaliate, putting it much more in the category of the slab shield for the Ogren than the dueling sword and stuff like that. So I think we should be leaning in that direction of having the charged heavy attacks be the most utility heavy part of the weapon, and just giving it some sort of light utility that can do in both modes as well, or either or, right? The second thing we have to address here is that imbalance of crit. Why is this weapon so bad at crit when other weapons are better? A lot of that comes down to the blessings. First of all, let's just kind of look at the blessings here. We just need to have more quality blessings on this weapon because obviously it's behind the other competitors. Bash is not a sufficiently powerful blessing in the current era of Darktide. Riposte gives double the duration for dodging an attack, which is much easier to do than pushing is, and it gives 30% more crit chance. So this weapon already doesn't get as much out of crits, and is getting like discriminated against by Bash. So I think this talent needs to go to 6 seconds and be 20% crit, easy peasy. Then take a swing here, which is one of the unique things, this weak spot damage for 3 seconds on pushing enemies. This could also be converted to a 6-second buff. 3 seconds is too short for buffs in Darktide. It interrupts your attack patterns much too often and just is not very easy for many players to pull off. We also have lots of kind of dead perks on here. Stuff like Unstoppable Force, stuff like Opportunist Rending versus staggered enemies, right? These sort of things, like, they're okay, but they just aren't really offering anything to the balance. I think that personally, the number one thing they could add in terms of blessings to this weapon that would automatically, immediately make it a useful weapon that players would run with is Skullcrusher. If they added one of these blessings, if they just simply removed Unstoppable Force and added in Skullcrusher here, this weapon would be run, because Skullcrusher is that powerful of a blessing, and this weapon does have enough stagger in its current configuration that it can get that benefit. And especially when you consider that the hooked mode of this weapon does stagger enemies. So you would lodge it in someone's head and pull them a little bit, and when you yank them, they do get staggered. They would take extra damage from that rip because of Skullcrusher, and this would automatically make this weapon a viable choice just by adding that one blessing alone. And I don't think that outside of that, they would really need to increase its synergy with crits. There's plenty of weapons out there that don't have all that great crits, but usually those weapons do have Skullcrusher or Slaughterer or some other really massively powerful strength or damage increasing talent. And finally, we have to talk about the imbalance with the talent tree. A lot of this stuff is not going to really be rectifiable, stuff like precision violence, right? You can still get pretty respectable attack speed on the Crowbar and all that good stuff, but there is one talent that I think really needs to be looked at for this, and that's Hyperviolence. I talked about it previously, but Hyperviolence has far too much of a biasing effect on this class. It tells you more or less that you must be using a high crit ratio, fast attacking weapon, and that precludes the Crowbar from getting to use this as well as those other weapons can, so he falls really, really far behind. What should happen with Hyperviolence is simply that the extra damage you get should apply to your next attack, not to all attacks within 1 second. You should get one more attack that does that overkill damage. So if you proceed to overkill even more, it can stack it higher and higher, but you have to be chaining instant kills. If you do an attack and you don't get a kill, it resets, right? And that will loosen up the time constraint that exists on this Hyperviolence thing, where you have to be attacking within 1 second in order to get the benefit, and it will make it so that you can't spam a bunch of like super fast, really light attacks and pump out thousands and thousands of damage for effectively free. This would mean that you can land a really strong, heavy overhead with the Crowbar, do 5,000 damage, overkill that enemy by 4,000, and then turn around and do it even bigger the next time with a fully charged overhead Crowbar attack. That would actually give this weapon like an identity of being the single heaviest hitting strike down weapon on the class for like these big blowups on Carapace or whatever it is. So I think that just changing a simple change to Hyperviolence like that, just changing this to be on your next attack rather than all attacks for the next 1 second, would be massive. It would help to sort of rebalance the class around blowing up targets in one hit rather than it just being a spam fest. And there you go. So that's my ideas for the crowbar, guys. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you think that the crowbar has potential out there. It's a pretty dang good weapon as it is, but it is just far behind the pack right now, and I think we all want the best for it. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you have any other ideas about the how this weapon could be improved? Do you have concerns about my ideas for a revision? Would I make it too OP? Would it be the next flame staff? Who knows? Thanks for watching so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.